What's up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Wraparound, brought to you each and every week by the Hockey News. I am your host, Emma Lingan. I am joined by my wonderful co-host, Michael Augello, and we are here to bring you all of the bite-sized storylines from around the NHL, and we've got lots of them today. We've got playoffs, we've got coaches getting fired, we've got a little bit of everything. So before we do get into that, do want to let you all know that we are brought to you by our good friends at Sticks.com. Hey, hockey players, why drop a fortune on your sticks when you can snag pro level composite sticks at Sticks.com? That's STIX.com. These all black beauties are made for sniping, saucing, and shutting it down, all while looking sharp on the ice. And the best part, prices start at just $85.13 US for a 3-pack. Yep, you heard that right. Elite sticks without the elite price. Hit up Sticks.com, that's STIX.com now, and gear up without the markup. All right, Michael, of course, we're going to start talking about playoffs here. The Washington Capitals took a 3-1 series lead over the Montreal Canadiens with a commanding 5-2 win in Game 4 on Sunday. So, of course, the big storyline of this game, though, Tom Wilson, it's always Tom Wilson, right? He's always at the center of it. But Tom Wilson laid a huge hit on Canadiens defenseman Alex Carrier near the end of the game. Obviously, that has stirred up a lot of discussion in regards to how the game was officiated and really how the playoffs as a whole have been officiated. Wilson, of course, not penalized on the play. That's where a lot of the discussion has come from. And Carrier left the game, evidently injured. We don't know further details on that yet, but do you think that even though he wasn't penalized on the play, do you think that Tom Wilson might be facing some discipline from the league, similar to what happened with Brandon Hagel in Tampa?
I think we would have heard about a hearing from the Department of Player Safety already had they intended to do so. And honestly, my approach to it is I don't know whether they have the guts to try to suspend him, because if you're going to suspend him for a game or two, why didn't you call the penalty at the time? Because that penalty could be the turning point in the series. I mean, you had Montreal up 2-1 in the third period, and Wilson freight trains Carrier. And I looked at the video and then saw it frame by frame, and it was a head hit. It was a high hit. I don't think he left his skates, but Carrier was, I think, leaning forward a little bit, and it was a head hit. 9 times out of 10, Tom Wilson or anybody like Tom Wilson gets suspended for that, but he didn't. And the play goes the other way, and Brandon Duhaime scores the goal to tie the game, and then pretty much, I mean, Montreal just melted at that point. The inconsistency of the NHL through the first 3 or 4 games of the playoffs is baffling. The Hagel suspension, like you mentioned, the Matthew Tkachuk 5-minute major at the end of the Florida Tampa game, when maybe it was debatable if he could get suspended or not, but they gave him a 5-minute major in a game misconduct to get him out of the game to avoid any further problems. The John Tavares Artem Zub hit, which knocked him out of the game because of concussion protocol and kept him from being on the power play during a double minor, and then Ottawa wins the game. All these things, there's inconsistencies laced through them all, and this one I think was the most blatant of all. I have to go a long way to defend the Montreal Canadiens, but I have to, because I think this call was ridiculous. Our lack of call was absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, like you said, feels like we would have heard something by now if there was going to be any supplemental discipline. We haven't. So unfortunate there for Montreal and Alex Carrier, hoping for a best case scenario there as far as his injury goes. Over in the West, the St. Louis Blues have made things interesting in their series. They have now tied the series with Winnipeg. They're at 2 wins each. The Blues had a dominant 5-2 win in Game 4. Connor Hellebuyck was pulled for the second straight game, he allowed 11 goals combined over the last 2 starts. He's got just an .817 save percentage in the series. And this is a guy who we actually was just announced this morning, a finalist for the Vezina Trophy for his performance in the regular season. So, Michael, what's the concern level here for Hellebuyck and the Jets? Do you think that they can overcome his poor start to the playoffs and regain momentum, or is it just is it out of their control at this point?
Well, I called him Four Nations Connor at the beginning of the playoffs, and that keeps going. I think he's played 1.5 good games in the playoffs, and he's been a stinker for 2.5. And you expect the guy who's going to win the Vezina, who has a good chance of winning the Hart, to play better than this. And I think the chances of the Jets going deep in the playoffs rest on Hellebuyck playing like regular season Hellebuyck and not Four Nations Connor. It's baffling. Now, it's a different pressure point. We know that. I think the play of the goaltender is always more focused. There's more of a focus on them in the postseason, but he's never really, sort of shrunk from that responsibility. But this year, I mean, the year that he's had, you'd think he'd be able to get past this and play at that high level. And Emma, you saw him more than I did. He was fantastic during the regular season, and the way he's played, especially the 2 games in St. Louis, just makes me scratch my head.
Yeah, I would say for me personally, the concern level's pretty high. I think that as the Jets go, or as Hellebuyck goes, so go the Jets. I think that, not to say that they don't, obviously they have scoring weapons. They've got Mark Scheifele and they've got Kyle Connor, and they've got other pieces there, but Hellebuyck is the kind of goaltender who can steal you games. And occasionally, not that the Jets need every game stolen for them, but during the playoffs and during a tight competitive series against what was the hottest team in the league at the end of the season in St. Louis, that's going to be, you're going to need your goalie to be able to steal you some games. And I think that not only can he not do that, but he's costing them games at this point. And it is, I can't help but scratch my head about it either, because it is not at all the kind of Hellebuyck that we saw during the regular season. Again, covering the Central Division, I would turn his name into a verb and say like, oh, this team got Hellebuycked, just because he was so dominant during the regular season, and he just looks like a completely different goalie now. So it's one of those like, can he get over it? You hope that it's just a temporary thing, but if he doesn't, I'm starting to really get concerned about the Jets in this series. Speaking of goaltending, the Edmonton Oilers started Calvin Packard over Stuart Skinner in Game 4 of their series against the LA Kings, and they won in a thrilling comeback victory in overtime. Again, goaltending always been a hot button issue for Edmonton, but now that they've got these back-to-back wins, do you think the Oilers should stick with Packard in Game 5, or should they go back to Skinner?
You don't mess with success. If you're winning, you don't change anything unless injury happens. And they won both these games. And you have to say these were 2 blown opportunities by the LA Kings. They had a 4-3 lead in Game 3. That questionable Evander Kane goal, and then I think it was Evan Bouchard who scored the game winner, and then they won 7-4, so they walked away with it after that Kane goal. And then last night they tie it up in the final minute with the goalie pulled, and then win in overtime. I mean, there was a legitimate chance for the LA Kings to sweep this series, and now you've let the Edmonton Oilers. And you cannot let a team with McDavid and Draisaitl off the mat. Now, you're going back to LA where you've only lost 5 times during the regular season. You're going to have to win Game 5, because I have no confidence, based on what the LA Kings have done in Edmonton, that they can get over the mental hurdle of beating Edmonton in Edmonton. So this looks like a 7-game series. And if I'm Chris Knobloch, I stick with Packard for the rest of the series, even though Skinner has been your number one throughout the year.
Well, and one could argue, and we have argued, that Edmonton really doesn't have a true number one goalie. They kind of have two number twos. So just go with whatever one is bringing you success, as you said. Um, Another series that, at least in my opinion, has been surprisingly close, gotten surprisingly interesting here, is Vegas, Minnesota. So the Golden Knights evened up the series against Minnesota. So the Wild actually had a 1-game lead, but now they are tied up in the series. Vegas had the 4-3 overtime win in game 4 with the goal from Ivan Barbashev, the OT winner. So again, Kirill Kaprizov has been the story of the series. He's been the story of the season for the Minnesota Wild. And even though he missed a good chunk of the season with injury, he is currently sitting 4th in playoff scoring. He's got 4 goals, 4 assists. He's been a difference maker for the Wild all year. And again, part of why I maybe thought that this series wasn't going to be that close was because even though they had Kaprizov, there are questions of, is he 100%? He's missed a lot of time with that injury. What version of Kaprizov are you getting? But I mean, if you look at the numbers with Kaprizov in the lineup, the Wild have a 25-13-3 record, a +7 goal differential. When he's not in the lineup, they are 20-17-4 with a -11 goal differential. So how, obviously, as I said, he's a difference maker. Do you think that there's a chance that a good chance that he just takes over the rest of this series and potentially leads the Wild to an upset?
I don't know how much more he can take over this series than he has already. He's been phenomenal. It's weird because the year that Vegas won the Stanley Cup, I think they had a really tough time with Winnipeg in the first round. And I'm pretty sure they were down 2-1. And I think it was game 4, like Michael Amadio scored in overtime to sort of get them jump started. They started slow on that cup run, and then they just built momentum. And Vegas is the team that I had going to the cup final out of the West because of their path being a lot easier than some of the teams in the Central Division. I mean, Minnesota was lying in the weeds for Vegas. Kaprizov, maybe they held him out an extra week just to make sure he was 100%. Joel Eriksson comes back. They've got talented players like Zuccarello and Matthew Boldy. You add Z Bouillon to the lineup to go along with Faber. Gustafson's played really well. I mean, had Vegas fallen behind 3-1, it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility for them to close it out in game 5 in Vegas. I would be shocked if Vegas doesn't turn it on now that they're tied 2-2, now that they've had a scare put in them, that they would go on to win the series. But you have to respect Minnesota and what they're doing right now.
Absolutely. Going back over to the East, the Maple Leafs had a chance to sweep their series against the Ottawa Senators. Came up short, though. They lost in overtime 4-3 in game 4. The OT winner for Ottawa came from Jake Sanderson. That's his first playoff goal. Considering now, the Maple Leafs playoff history, definitely a topic of conversation. Is there a chance that the Senators have now, just with one win in overtime, have maybe planted this seed of doubt within Toronto's locker room? Or is Toronto just going to be able to bounce back from this and say, you can't win them all?
They wouldn't be human if that spark of doubt was not lingering in their brains. I know that it's lingering through the hearts and brains of the Leafs nation. They've stocked up on nitroglycerin pills in the emergency rooms of the GTA, because if Ottawa goes in on Tuesday and wins game 5 and sends it back to Ottawa for game 6, you're going to have lots of Leaf fans threatening to jump off bridges in the area. It's been a close series, and you've had 3 overtime games. So you can't say they've dominated it from stem to stern, but they had an opportunity to wrap it up. And like I said, Tavares was knocked silly by Artem Zub and held out by the concussion spotter during the whole overtime, or during the whole 4-minute double minor. Comes back, and then Jake Sanderson scores the goal in OT to keep the series alive. I think the one concern for Toronto is, even though he has played very well in the series, there have been stretches where Anthony Stolarz has only faced one shot or two shots in a period, and he's still letting up goals. And like sometimes goalies need to be involved in the play when he's like sort of sitting back there and not busy, and then all of a sudden he gets a shot on goal and it beats him. That's extremely deflating to a team. Now they should be confident. They're up 3-1. They're going back home. Tavares is not having any kind of concussion issues. I know Austin Matthews had a rest day today, but he's healthy and will play in Game 5. The Leafs need to finish out the series, because if they don't, then widespread panic will start to invade the area around Toronto.
It's that time of year, tale as old as time. Back over in the West, the Colorado Avalanche had a statement win over the Dallas Stars. They tied their series at 2-2 with a 4-0 win in Game 4. So, of course, the big story of this series has been Gabriel Landeskog. He is back playing in the NHL for the first time in almost 3 years. He led the way. He had a goal and an assist, and that was his first goal, of course, in 3 years. So has the narrative around Landeskog with Colorado, do you think, of course, we all thought like, wow, what a feel-good comeback story for this, and it's going to do so much for the locker room and for the morale of the team just to get Landeskog back in the lineup. But has the narrative kind of shifted from that feel-good story into, oh, he might actually be an X factor for the Avs now?
Yeah, I mean, everybody thought, okay, he can play third line and he'll be a motivational presence. You know, my God, what a great story! He's back after 3 years. Like, you didn't expect him to be Gabriel Landeskog. You didn't expect him to be the force that he was. And, you know, frankly, even though Colorado has played well after the trade for Rantanen, and Martin Necas has played really well, they miss Rantanen. They miss that big power forward type presence. And if Landeskog is a similar type player, if he can be 80% of what he was 3 years ago, then that definitely gives the Avalanche a leg up in the series. Now, it's going into Game 5, and Peter DeBoer came out today and said Miro Heiskanen is not going to play in Game 5. I get the feeling, Emma, and again, you know these teams better than I do since they're Central Division teams, and Nashville played them 4 times. You know, Heiskanen and his presence is a big factor in that series. No matter how good Thomas Harley is playing, Miro Heiskanen in the lineup is a big factor. If they can get him back if it gets to a Game 7 and they get him back anywhere close to being 100%, that could be something that puts them over the top.
Yeah, I agree. They miss him a lot. And not to say at all that Colorado didn't miss Gabriel Landeskog in their lineup, but, you know, they have so many weapons to where he wasn't going to be the make or break. Like, his absence from the playoffs was not going to make or break their chances, I don't think. At least that's not how people saw it. But with Dallas, the injuries they have, you know, Jason Robertson and, like you said, Miro Heiskanen, that's huge, especially Heiskanen on the defense, because their defense beyond Thomas Harley and Esa Lindell, Dallas's defense is not very strong at all. And this is, you know, they're getting exposed by teams with elite offenses like Colorado. Another series that has been surprisingly not close, in my opinion, has been the Battle of Florida. So the Tampa Bay Lightning went down in the 0-2 hole to start the series. Florida took the first 2 games, but then Tampa was able to get a win in Game 3, a commanding one at that. They had a 5-1 victory. You know, and when they were losing these games to Florida, it was pretty bleak. They only got 2 goals in Game 1. They got shut out in Game 2. You know, how much do you think getting a 5-1 win in Game 3 is going to really do wonders for the Lightning's confidence, you know, heading into Game 4 and the rest of the series?
I mean, not only winning 5-1, but winning 5-1 without Hagel in the lineup because he was suspended. And you saw Kucherov come to life. And as Nikita Kucherov goes, so goes the Tampa Bay Lightning. The first 2 games were lousy. I mean, I was looking forward to this series as, physical, exciting, chippy, rat-filled, on both sides. I mean, they're great teams. They have great talent, but they also have players that you'd love to see somebody drive them through the wall. And it hasn't been that. I mean, other than Hagel taking a run at Barkov and getting suspended, and then Barkov playing in Game 4, and Matthew Tkachuk doing his usual Matthew Tkachuk imitation, it really hasn't been that compelling. Now, it could have been a very short series, obviously, had Tampa not gotten off the mat and won Game 3. Now, they need to do what's pretty tough, which is win 2 games on the road after they lose the first 2 games at home. And again, it's like, if memory serves, I remember that Montreal-Boston series back in 2011, the year the Bruins won the Stanley Cup. I believe they lost the first 2 in Montreal and then came back and won the next 2 in Boston, or vice versa. So, I mean, it's tough falling behind 2-0 to catch up and even the series. And we've seen it a couple times in these playoffs. But I think if Tampa evens the series, then I think it's going the full 7, and it should get a lot more interesting than it's been right now.
Definitely. The final series in the East, we've got Carolina and New Jersey. The Hurricanes did manage to take a 3-1 series lead. They got a 5-2 win over New Jersey in Game 4 on Sunday. However, they had to close out the game without their starting goalie, Freddie Andersen, who has been lights out for them so far in these playoffs. So Timo Meier collided hard with Andersen in the crease. Andersen had to leave the game. It looked potentially like it could be a head injury. Pyotr Kochetkov came in and replaced him for the rest of the game. Rod Brind'Amour said that Andersen was going to be reevaluated on Monday, which is kind of standard practice at this point. But looking at the numbers, and the numbers don't say everything, but just looking at the numbers, it's looking a little bleak for Carolina, because Kochetkov in the playoffs, in 7 playoff games, he's got a 3.73 goals against average and an 870 save percentage. Not great, not ideal. So if Andersen is out long-term, which at this point we don't know yet, but if he is, how much of a chance do you think the Hurricanes have to go on a deep run? Even if they do get past the Devils in this series, again, they already have a 3-1 series lead. But beyond that, I mean, how much of a chance do they have if they're going with Kochetkov as their goalie?
Well, Kochetkov is the goaltender who I thought that they should go into the playoffs with, simply because he was the one who played the most games during the regular season. But obviously Brind'Amour was sort of preserving Freddie Andersen for the playoffs. But Freddie Andersen has had a history of getting hurt in the playoffs, of getting hurt during the regular season, and not playing well in the playoffs. Now, he has played well so far. But this is sort of par for the course for Frederik Andersen. He just gets hurt at the most inopportune times. He didn't volunteer to get hurt. I mean, Timo Meier hit him. So it's like, you can't, it was something that was unavoidable. I think Carolina can get by New Jersey simply because New Jersey without Jack Hughes is just not a very powerful team. But it's going to be tough for them to get by Washington in the second round. The way they've played against Montreal, even though Montreal's challenged them, I think Washington will have a distinct advantage over Carolina if both 3-1 series go to their logical conclusions.
All right. Well, in non-playoff news, the Pittsburgh Penguins have parted ways with head coach Mike Sullivan. Obviously, he becomes now one of the most coveted head coaches on the market this offseason. Already heard him linked to places like Boston and New York, and pretty much anywhere where there's a coaching opening, he's going to be a hot commodity there. This has kind of been a topic of discussion for a while now, is whether Pittsburgh should move on from Sullivan with everything that they're going through in terms of, they can't fully rebuild as long as they have Sidney Crosby on the roster, and just not everything, of course, not that doesn't fall on Mike Sullivan or the coaching staff, but sometimes a change needs to be made. So in your opinion, Michael, do you think this was the right decision by Pittsburgh to part ways with him? And then beyond that, follow up, I mean, where would you consider to be a good obvious landing spot for him?
Now, the way this was sold was it was a mutual decision. I don't know if that's the case. Then that just might be, the way it's being reported to the media. Sullivan had 2 more years left in the contract. He's one of the highest paid coaches in the league. I mean, read the writing on the wall here. The Penguins over the last year, the reality is they're in a rebuild. You've got great players like Crosby and Malkin and Letang. Letang had surgery at the end of the year. We don't know whether he's going to come back. He's been, amazing in terms of his ability to bounce back from things that most people couldn't. Crosby is still a fantastic player. Malkin is coming to the end of a great career. This team doesn't have a lot of opportunity to have success in the postseason. So if it was sort of mutually agreed that, we would rather go with a young coach or a rebuilding coach, somebody who's a teaching coach with a lot of young players coming in, and you can go and get a long-term contract someplace else. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Kyle Dubas said he's not going to hire a new coach until early July, so they've got time to search around and find the right fit. As for Sullivan, my choice would be the Rangers. I think the Rangers are, they've got a lot of talent, but everything was just sort of disjointed this year, really created by Chris Drury and how he managed that team. Drury has a lot of connections to USA Hockey. So does Mike Sullivan. Mike Sullivan will probably be looking for a big payday. I think he could get that in Boston. I think he could get that in Philadelphia. But if you look at those 3 teams, I think New York is the closest to bouncing back right away and being and having a goalie like Igor Shesterkin doesn't hurt. And I mark my words, start the rumor now. Wherever Mike Sullivan goes, wow, maybe Sidney Crosby wants to be reunited with his former head coach. Mark my words. That'll be the narrative on every edition of the Wraparound from October to the deadline next March.
That'll be our new Vancouver Canucks locker room drama. It'll be, where's Sidney Crosby going to go? Even though he has said on the record on numerous occasions he has zero intent to leave Pittsburgh, that does not stop people from speculating wildly. And as you said, I'm sure with Sullivan moving on to somewhere else, those rumors are only going to continue to pop up more. So I think you're absolutely right. That's something we should definitely expect. I want to wrap up today with some CHL news. Top prospect in the 2026 draft, Gavin McKenna. I mean, he's a machine. He has set the longest point streak in the CHL since the year 2000. 51 games. I had to read that again to make sure that it wasn't a typo. 51 games with a point. He did it with 5 assists in Medicine Hat's 7-2 playoff win over Lethbridge. Now, throughout this 51-game point streak, McKenna has 39 goals and 90 assists. That's 129 points. Once again, I had to read that several times to make sure that I was reading it correctly. Will we start to see a similar sort of hype? Again, he's not even eligible for this year's draft. So this year's draft hadn't even happened yet. But once 2026 comes around, are we going to start to see like Connor Bedard or even Connor McDavid level hype around Gavin McKenna? Because what he's doing is really just incredible.
I think you're going to see a level of hype. I think it's going to be very high. I don't know whether it's going to be at the level of Bedard or Crosby or McDavid or Matthews, because those guys were centers and he's a winger. Patrick Kane was a first overall. I'm not saying you can't have a dominant player in the NHL who's playing on the wing. Kaprizov, Pasternak, Kane, we've seen it. But I think the hype is always generated by that franchise cornerstone center. So, and I don't think he's going to shift from wing to center. So, what he's doing right now is incredible. He's got 29 points in 11 playoff games. That's almost 3 points per playoff game, folks. I mean, even in the WHL, that's impressive. So, yeah, I mean, he's going to be the first overall pick next year. There'll be a lot of hype. I just don't know whether it's going to be the same level of hype that I saw in Florida 10 years ago with Connor McDavid or with Bedard a few years ago when he was drafted by the Hawks.
All right. Well, that is going to do it for today's edition of the Wraparound. Thank you again, Michael, for joining me today, talking some hockey during these playoffs. Once again, thank you to Stix.com for sponsoring us. We will be back with an all-new episode next week. We will see you then.